What I would like to do is to introduce both of us. So let me start. I'm Michelle Ladegan from ULAC Marketing, specializing in social media marketing and marketing strategies. Christopher, would you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about who you are, what you do?
Well, I have been working directly with people, particularly in the field of relationships and what they mean, their mystery, why we bother with them, and how we mess them up, and how not often enough do we actually manage to get them right. And sometimes we do. There are, in my opinion, very specific techniques and tricks that one can learn that get better with practice. Quite why do we bother with relationships? I'm not sure. But the fact of the matter is we do. Relationships are very much part and parcel of this life, both the ones as between human beings, the relationship between us and nature, the relationship between us and the planet, the relationship between us and animals. All these are highly complex and require different levels and different levels of skill. And the great sadness for me, and it is a sadness, we're not taught anything. If you ask your child, if you happen to be blessed with one of those, what they are learning about relationships in school, the answer is likely to be a blank stare. We teach them nothing. Quite frankly, the fact that we get it as right as we do, in other words, we don't actually murder one another in the middle of a dark and stormy night, it says something for our resilience and our ingenuity. And we certainly have that. We are very resilient as human beings. We can put up with an enormous amount of, frankly, rubbish. And we are extremely clever. We find our way out of situations that very often seem insoluble. There's no way out of this, but we do. It would be much easier if we taught. I sometimes come to the conclusion that in point of fact, we are meant to struggle. We're meant to struggle with this, that it's not meant to be easy. Well, if that is the intention, then they've certainly succeeded.
So may I ask, when you say kids are not taught relationships skills in school, it certainly rings true, although they do learn from experience, don't they? They do obviously have daily contact with other kids, and they learn how to interact and how to communicate and so on with experience, right? Are you saying that the what they are learning from their own experience is not necessarily adequate?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. It's in general terms, it's hopelessly inadequate. People go into relationships without knowing why. People go into relationships with very little understanding of the rules of relationship, and there are rules. And as far as the technique of running a satisfactory relationships, it remains for, and I don't have any stats to prove this, it remains for the greater majority of people a total mystery. What are the rules? Why do they work? Why don't they work? And how often do you walk away from your relationship and think, what did I just do that caused this explosion? Well, there's one great word that I make a lot of, and that is responsibility. The common association, the common meaning that we attach to the word responsibility is that in some way or another, we're to blame, we're at fault. We have responsibility for this. Yes, but the meaning of the word for me is much clearer. We have the ability to respond. We are blessed with the ability to respond. Life will not give you something you cannot handle. You will almost certainly have to upskill yourself. You will almost certainly have to abandon some of the points of view that you are currently holding, but you have the ability to respond. That's responsibility.
When you say we have the responsibility, obviously, you know, from childhood, you can't, you as you say, you're resilient and you learn and you experience and so on, and you live according to what you know, right? And if one is not aware of this responsibility, and as you say, the ability to respond, if I can reframe the question, in many cases, especially with kids and teenagers, they are not aware that they may respond. They are fearful of responding. And that's where the avoidance of conflict comes from. And this is obviously an integral part of relationships. How would you do it differently, especially with the kids, if you start with the fundamental teaching of kids with relationships? How would you want to do it?
Well, let's just play a fantasy game. And I understand it's a fantasy because the chances of it ever happening are so remote that they're barely worth considering. It verges on the point of being a fairy tale. This should be taught in school. In school. Because you're already in school forces you into a relationship. Well, how do you run that? You have a relationship with your teacher. You have a relationship with the person sitting next to you, behind you, in front of you. You have a relationship with the children that you interact with at the breaks. What is the relationship? I have a sort of fairly smart-assed definition of relationship, and that is to be aware of the other person's state of being.
Yes.
And that's a technique.
That's quite interesting. Although it doesn't stop there with being aware of the other person. It's obviously contributing and so forth and connecting. May I go back to where you say it should be taught in schools? Don't you think that religion had some part in the better upbringing to kids, you know, in the past few hundred years? For instance, the religion did teach values, and it taught respect and you know, love and connection and so on. Didn't it attempt to teach humanity about relationships?
Yes, I think it did. And I don't really want to get into an in-depth of pros and cons of religion one way or another. No, but sure. I think, yes, that religion did. It threw the word into the mix that we don't really understand, and that word is love. And then we can have long discussions about love and what it is and what it isn't. There was an American philosopher, author, writer by the name of Leo Buscaglia, who taught, and I think it was at one of the great American universities on the California coast in Los Angeles. I think so. I could look it up. And he asked permission to start giving a series of lectures on love. And somewhat reluctantly, because it's a touchy subject, somewhat reluctantly, the university authorities gave him permission. And he was hoping to get a small lecture hall where he would have 20 or so students. And in fact, they gave him a very large lecture hall, and his first lecture was attended by something like 500 students, because they wanted to know about this very strange subject called love. And he wrote in his book, I forget its title, but it's about love. He wrote in his book that after 15 years, they still didn't actually know what love was. And I think that's the truth. It's like there are some mysteries that we need to explore. But that doesn't mean that just because we're exploring that we will arrive at a destination. I mean, what's the destination of life? Death?
Death.
Hardly. So
could you elaborate on that then?
That in itself is a mystery. We're put here with all these concepts that are in many ways inexplicable, but it seems that it is our fate to wrestle with them, and it is in the wrestling that we learn. I mean, have we explored all the intricacies of just ordinary algebraic arithmetic? No. There are people continually coming up with new stuff, and that's the point. But explore we must. And our children are not taught anything about the intricacies of the relationship, about love, what it is. As soon as you think you've got the answer to that question, you are almost certainly wrong. Isn't that amazing? As soon as you think you've got the answer to life, you think again, because the path still stretches ahead. Where to? I don't know. But what a journey. What a journey.
That has some sort of resemblance to the Tao Te Ching, where one of the verses says, when you think you know, you don't know, paraphrasing. That seems to be also part of living, is that, as you say, you explore, and once you find out something, you learn that you don't know it, you don't understand it at all, or you don't know anything. And especially, I had a thought a moment ago when you were speaking about kids and exploring, is that kids are in many cases discouraged from exploring because it's dangerous, right?
Quite.
So where's the balance? Because if you explore too much and go into the dangerous unknown, it's especially for kids, it can become life-threatening, and especially in today's day and age. So where's the balance, and where's the how do we then teach them to explore but safely, and to learn and to want to learn? Because sorry for interrupting there. You were saying earlier about part of the point of life is to learn, right? And to learn to understand life and relationships and love and all of these things and so on. And it seems to me these days that that is a quality that has gone out the window. People don't have, or in general, the public don't have the desire to learn anymore because it's difficult. Is it right?
Yes, and because it is not safe. But life is not a safe process. This illusion of safety is just that, an illusion. Life is Life is a process that is full of risk. And what we need to be schooled in is how to manage that risk. Just look at the process of birth itself. I don't know what the stats are, but infant mortality rate and mother mortality rate as the direct result of the process of birth is high. So what we must do now, stop procreating because you might die. Well, really? Life is a risky business. And thank goodness for that. Imagine if it wasn't. Imagine if life was perfectly safe. Guess what? It would be close to hell on earth.
Explain that to me. What do you mean by saying life would be hell on earth if it were easy?
Well, it would be boring. You'd wake up in the morning and say, what am I going to do today? No, I can't do that, it's dangerous. 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 Breathing oxygen is dangerous. Oxygen is a deadly poison unless you've got exactly the right quantity, which is what, 17% of the atmosphere or something. Boost that quantity of oxygen in the atmosphere to 35%, and the body will die. So every time you breathe, you're taking in just the right amount of poison.
So if I understand this correctly, then, you know, these days, stress, anxiety, and fear is sort of at the order of the day. And are you saying that that is just part of life? We shouldn't try to minimize that. We should rather just manage it, because, as you say, exploring is dangerous. Life is dangerous. It's going to be scary. We will be fearful, and we will stress and have anxiety. What is your opinion about that?
What's the only thing that you've got to do to get a violin to make noise?
You have to disturb it.
You have to stress the strings.
Yeah.
You wind them tight to exactly the right degree of tightness, so that the noise is pleasant to the ear. If you over tighten them, it's awful. If you under tighten them, it's awful. It's got to have just the right amount of stress. And for me, we're no different. Stress is an integral part of life. Can it become too much? Of course. Ice cream is lovely. But if you try living off ice cream, you're going to get into deep trouble. My favorite, chocolate. You know the saying, save the planet. It's the only one with chocolate. But if I lived on chocolate, that would be very unhealthy.
So that ties back into the same old saying of, too much of one thing is a bad thing. Or too much of a good thing is bad for you, right? So I do get that. So, and getting back to the stress, anxiety, and the fear, how can humanity as a whole start to manage the fear and the stress and anxiety better? Because it seems we, at this time, are unsuccessful with managing it. It seems that it is destroying us.
I think it's going to take us quite a long time. As to the actual technique, there are simple techniques that can be taught. And I'm not going to just rattle them off in a discussion of this nature, because there's no point. But there are simple techniques. One is, this one I'll give you. One is the incredible value of being willing to be wrong. As soon as you are willing to be wrong, you take the stress out. It's only when you are insisting that you are right about anything you automatically put yourself under great stress. You don't have to be wrong, just be willing to be wrong. You may be right, but be willing to be wrong.
Why do you say you put yourself under stress if you insist on being right all the time?
Because then you've got to defend that. You've got to defend it. As soon as I'm willing to be wrong, I've got nothing to defend. So I will listen to you and what you say, and I'll think, maybe I was wrong. Can I agree with this? I'll consider that. Maybe I can agree with it. And maybe I can't. Then you dance. Then the violin of life can play harmonious tunes, and then we can dance. And that's what we're here for, is to dance. To sing.
That's profound. So
imagine if we just danced with one another. I used to dance competitively. And one of the things that you learned to do is to give in, is to surrender, is to allow your partner to move you here and move you there. As soon as you resisted and said, I'm not going, there's no more dance. Easy? No. Anything but easy. But imagine how boring it would be if life was easy.
So, when you say being willing to be wrong, we are not taught that either. But in religion, people are taught to be humble, and I believe that sort of ties into that. But this concept of willing to be wrong, if we knew this, growing up, we'd have far less conflict, right? And far less issues with what we can do, especially perfectionists. These people believe that everything has to be absolutely perfect and they can't make mistakes. And we are constantly punished for mistakes. So in a sense, we are taught that we should always be right and do the right thing and never make mistakes. Isn't it time to make a U-turn on that as well? And to say,
absolutely.
Make mistakes, learn from it.
Absolutely. In fact, I think we're designed to make mistakes, because if we don't make mistakes, then how can you learn? Because there's nothing to learn, because you're always right. Well, if you're always right, then let us end this experiment that we call life right now, because there's nothing to learn.
Exactly, yeah.
And, well, okay.
Sure. That is quite
remarkable stupidity.
Yes.
And to say that we are spitting in the eye of whoever created this, what some of us call God, is to put it mildly. He's built us to be resilient, to make mistakes, and to have the ability and say, that didn't work. Let me do it differently. That didn't work. Let me do it differently.
So,
one fantastic ability we have is the ability to change our minds. And we're not taught.
So should we, for instance, with making mistakes, manage it differently? Let's say someone wronged you in some way. What is a better way to do that? And as you say, if we understand the concept of making mistakes as part of life, and it should actually happen, we'll have less judgment as well. How would you advise humanity on how to respond to mistakes, their own and other people's mistakes?
accept. And in the acceptance, you then create the opportunity to examine whatever's going on. As soon as you fight what's going on, in other words, then you can't work with it. As soon as you accept, right, this is what's happening. This is what this man, this woman is doing. Okay, seems a bit odd to me, but let's have a look. In that moment, you de-stress the whole situation. As soon as you say, no, that's wrong, it can't be like that, you're inviting an atomic war.
But isn't that the diplomatic way that we have been managing most of it? You know, some parts of humanity have been successful with that, although, you know...
have they? Show me one part of humanity that's been successful, period.
What about Nelson Mandela? He did quite well with...
for a short while, and then he very conveniently died.
Yes. But
Jesus of Nazareth vanished, disappeared.
Yeah.
We still don't really know what happened to him.
Yeah.
He allowed himself to be crucified and then gone. He exists only as a mythological character.
And yes, exactly. So the better way to handle this, whether it's in our personal lives, in business, politics, wherever, is to accept what has happened, examine, leave space to correct or to rather improve on the situation. I don't like to say that things are right or wrong.
That word improve is dangerous. Leave space to do it differently. It's only after we've done it that we'll know whether it's an improvement or not. And it might not be an improvement. It might not be an improvement for you. It might be an improvement for me. And that's the wonder of it. That what can be good for you might be quite appalling for me. Might be good for you to give up ice cream. Might be good for you to give up ice cream. It might be good for me to eat some more.
But the choice is always there to do it differently, as you say.
Always, always.
What would you say to those who believe they don't have choice? Where do they find these answers? Because quite often people are in situations where they don't see the way out. There might be a way out, but they don't see it, and because, you know, being fixated on the problem. And from my point of view, yes, there is a choice, but they don't know what the other choice is. What would you tell people? How do they find that other option that they can't see?
Change your mind.
In what way?
In any way. You're saying, no, there isn't another option. Change your mind. There is another option. As soon as you say that, you create the opportunity to find it. For so long as you say there is no other option, there's no point in looking. There's always another way. There is always, always, always another way. Some ways are better than others because they produce a result that you want. But there's always another way. Change your mind. Easy? No. Of course, it's not easy. But imagine if life was easy. It's very boring.
You will explore that concept on another time. Our time is running out. So, Christopher, Nevill, I have to thank you very much for your time and for your wisdom. And I will see you next week. Is there anything you'd like to add before we before we end?
Yes, life is a process. Wrestle with it and enjoy the process. After all, wrestling involves close physical contact. All sorts of possibilities behind that.
Very interesting. Thank you very much. Have a lovely afternoon, and I will see you next week.
And thank you. I shall look forward. Take care.
Always welcome.